There is something genuinely interesting in the human capacity to worry about things that have not happened, and the thinkers who have considered this question most carefully offer observations that are worth hearing slowly, in the quiet. Tonight, we will move through several philosophical lenses. We will begin with Edmund Husserl and William James, two thinkers who looked carefully at the structure of consciousness and the ceaseless forward motion of thought. From there, we will turn to Arthur Schopenhauer and Alfred Adler, who understood the deep orientation of human beings toward what comes next. Henri Bergson will offer us a way of thinking about time itself, about the way past and future blend into the present in ways we rarely notice. Baruch Spinoza and Michel de Montaigne will illuminate something about the emotional weight of imagined scenarios, about how the mind creates suffering and also comfort out of pure possibility. Existential philosophy will open the question of what it means to exist in a field of uncertainty, where the future genuinely has not yet been decided. And at the end, Taoist thought will offer not a solution, but a different way of holding all of this. These ideas will not be taught in the way of a lecture. They will be woven into the reflection, introduced when they are useful, and allowed to linger when they have something to offer. You do not need to remember names or dates. You only need to notice, quietly, whether any of this resonates. The room is quiet. The night is still. There is no urgency in any of this. Let the ideas arrive slowly, the way thoughts do in the hours before sleep. Gently, one at a time, without particular destination. Let us begin. There is a philosopher named Edmund Husserl who spent a great deal of his life studying consciousness itself, not what we think about, but the structure of thinking, the mechanics of how experience unfolds in time. And one of the things he noticed, something he described with great care, was that the mind almost never exists entirely in the present moment. Right now, as you lie in the quiet, there is the sensation of the room around you, the weight of whatever covers you. Perhaps a sound, distant, almost indistinct. And yet even in this moment, your mind is not simply here. It is reaching. It carries with it a kind of forward lean, an orientation toward what comes next, even when nothing particular is coming. Husserl called this forward reach pretension. It is the way consciousness anticipates the next moment, the next word in a sentence, the next beat of a melody. Before the thing has arrived, the mind has already prepared a small space for it. And this is not a flaw in the design. It is, in fact, what allows experience to cohere at all. Without this quiet forward movement, the world would arrive as pure, disconnected fragments, each moment isolated from the one that follows. So, in a very real sense, the mind that worries about tomorrow is doing something close to what it always does. It is reaching. It is anticipating. The only difference in the quiet hours of the night is that there is nothing immediate to reach toward. The present has grown still. And so, the reach extends further, out past tomorrow morning, into next week, into conversations that may or may not happen, into outcomes that remain genuinely uncertain. William James, writing in the late 19th century, described the mind as something like a stream, not a static thing, not a collection of separate thoughts lined up in order, but a continuous flowing movement. He used the phrase stream of consciousness, and what he meant by it was something subtle. he meant that thought does not arrive in discrete units. It flows. One idea merges into the next, and within that flow there is always a fringe, a kind of halo of meaning that surrounds each thought, connecting it to what came before and reaching toward what might come next. When you lie in the quiet and find your mind moving through possibilities, rehearsing conversations, picturing outcomes, revisiting the same question from slightly different angles, you are not experiencing a malfunction. You are experiencing the stream. You are feeling the natural forward motion of a mind that, by its very nature, does not stand still. Consciousness does not appear to itself chopped up in bits. It flows. A river or a stream are the metaphors by which it is most naturally described. William James, The Principles of Psychology, 1890. There is something genuinely worth sitting with in that image. The stream does not choose where to go in the way we might imagine. It moves along the contours of what is already there. And in the quiet hours, when the usual banks and obstacles of the day have cleared away, the stream finds its own path. It finds the open questions. It finds the unresolved situations. It finds the future, which is by definition the largest open space available. Think for a moment about the nature of the night itself. During the day, there is always something claiming attention. A sound, a task, a person, a screen. The mind is pulled outward, toward specific things, specific demands. The present imposes itself. But when the day ends, and the room grows quiet, and the claims on attention dissolve, the stream does not stop flowing. It simply finds new territory to move through. And the future is always there, always available, always unresolved enough to be interesting. Consider someone lying awake before a difficult meeting. They have been in difficult meetings before. They know, in some rational sense, that tomorrow's meeting will unfold in its own way, that whatever they rehearse tonight will not match exactly what actually happens. They know this, and yet the rehearsal continues. The mind cycles through likely responses to anticipated objections. It imagines the room, the faces, the moment when something is said that requires a careful answer. This is not irrationality. This is the forward-leaning mind doing exactly what it does. It is treating the future like a present experience that simply hasn't quite arrived yet. It is feeling its way through what is coming, the way the hand feels in the darkness for a wall that must be there somewhere. Husserl would say that this person's consciousness is structured this way at the most fundamental level. The mind does not merely observe the present. It holds the present within a kind of temporal arc, carrying the just past and reaching toward the just coming, so that experience has coherence and duration, rather than being simply a series of disconnected instants. But there is something else here, something that Husserl's framework opens up, but does not fully account for. The future this person is reaching toward is not near. It is not the next beat of a melody, the next word in a sentence. It is hours away. And yet the mind treats it with a similar kind of reaching. It extends the same mechanism that usually operates in fractions of seconds across the much longer span of an unslept night. There is a particular quality to the mind in those hours, a kind of heightened activity that feels paradoxical given how quiet everything else has become. The body has stilled, the breath has slowed, the room is dark, but the interior landscape has become, if anything, more vivid. Scenarios play out with a clarity and emotional weight they often lack during the busyness of the day. This makes a certain kind of sense when you consider what James said about the stream. During the day, the stream is constantly diverted, interrupted, redirected. It flows around the rocks and obstacles of immediate experience. At night, the rocks are gone. The stream finds its own depth. And the depth, it turns out, is often the places where resolution has not yet arrived. You may want to sit with that idea for a moment. The depth of the stream, in the quiet, is found in unresolved things. The mind moves naturally toward them. Not because something is wrong, but because this is where the current flows when the distractions of the day are removed. There is also something in this about the nature of attention itself. Attention, James understood, is not a passive thing. It is active. It selects. And in the absence of external claims on attention, it selects according to what seems most pressing, most unfinished, most in need of some form of processing. The mind moves toward what it has not yet worked through, the way water moves toward the lowest point it can find. So when you find yourself, in the quiet hours, thinking through a situation that has not yet resolved itself, perhaps something at work, perhaps a relationship, perhaps a decision that keeps returning without settling, you are witnessing both Husserl and James in their most practical form. You are watching a consciousness that extends beyond the present, that flows continuously, that gravitates toward the open and unresolved. This does not mean the thinking will solve anything tonight. It very often won't. The resolution, if it comes, tends to come later, in some moment of the following day, when the situation itself offers new information. The rehearsal tonight is not preparation in any efficient sense. It is something more like the mind's way of keeping company with what matters, and perhaps that is worth knowing. The forward-reaching mind is not only a source of tension, it is also a sign of engagement, of care, of the fact that something in your life is important enough that the mind will not simply let it rest while you do. That is, in its own way, a kind of faithfulness. William James also had something interesting to say about the relationship between thought and the body. He observed that thought is never purely mental in the way we sometimes imagine it to be. Every movement of the mind has its correlate in the body. A tightening somewhere, a slight shift in breathing, a change in the quality of stillness. When you lie in the dark and the mind begins to move through an anticipated difficulty, the body knows. It registers the movement of thought in ways that are physical, that have weight and texture, even when the source of that weight is entirely imagined. This is not a new observation. James was drawing on and extending a tradition of thinking about the relationship between mind and body that goes back a long way. But his particular framing, the stream of consciousness moving through the body as much as through the intellect, has a particular relevance here. The heaviness that comes with nighttime anticipation is not only a mental experience, it is a bodily one. And the body does not know the difference between an imagined threat and an actual one, at least not in the immediate reactive sense. It responds to both. This is why rest can feel so elusive during periods of genuine uncertainty. The body is receiving continuous reports from the stream of consciousness, and those reports concern things that require attention. The body prepares, slightly, for the challenges it has been told to expect. the musculature holds a low-level readiness. The breath stays slightly shallower than it would if the mind were unoccupied. The weight of the blanket that should be comforting carries in some moments a hint of confinement instead. Husserl, if asked about this relationship between the bodily experience of anticipation and the structure of consciousness, would probably have pointed to what he called the lived body, the body as experienced from the inside, rather than the body as observed from the outside. The lived body is not a machine that runs on its own while the mind thinks. It is continuous with the mind's experience. When the mind reaches forward into anticipated futures, the lived body follows. They move together. This makes the experience of nighttime anticipation more coherent than it sometimes seems. It is not strange that the body feels what the mind is thinking. It is the natural consequence of being a unified being, in which body and mind are not truly separate. The separation is a conceptual convenience, not an experiential reality. In experience, they are one thing, moving together through the night. There is something almost quietly reassuring in that, once it has had time to settle. The bodily weight of anticipation is not a sign that the mind is malfunctioning. It is a sign of integration, of a being that takes its own thinking seriously enough to respond to it with the full weight of its physical presence. The body is paying attention too. It is part of the same reaching. James also wrote, with characteristic care, about the way the mind attends to some things and not others. Attention, he argued, is fundamentally selective. There is always more available to consciousness than consciousness can hold at once, and the mind must constantly choose what to bring forward and what to let recede. During the day, this selection is largely driven by external demands. Things impose themselves on attention. But in the quiet hours, when the external impositions have lifted, the selection becomes more internal. The mind chooses, or finds itself choosing, what to attend to. And it reliably, in many people, chooses the unresolved, the open questions, the approaching uncertainties. This is not a pathology of attention. It is attention doing its most ancient work, locating the things that are genuinely uncertain and genuinely consequential, and staying with them until some form of resolution appears. The difficulty is simply that true resolution often cannot appear in the night, because resolution depends on information and events that have not yet occurred, and so attention stays faithfully with what it has found, waiting for a resolution that the night cannot provide. There is a patient quality in this, even when it does not feel patient. Even when the returning thought feels like agitation or restlessness, there is underneath it something that resembles care. The mind stays with what matters to it. It does not leave easily. It keeps returning, the way a person keeps returning to the bedside of someone they love who is ill, not because the returning changes anything, but because leaving entirely would be its own kind of abandonment. The room is quiet. Let that idea rest for a moment. Arthur Schopenhauer was a German philosopher of the 19th century, and he was, in many ways, one of the least comforting thinkers who ever lived. He had little patience for optimism, and his vision of human nature was a stark one. But within that starkness, there is something genuinely illuminating, something that, once heard, explains a great deal about why the mind, in the quiet hours, does what it does. Schopenhauer understood human beings as fundamentally driven by what he called the will. Not will in the sense of choice or determination, but something more primal. An undirected, ceaseless striving that underlies all of human activity. This striving is not aimed at any particular thing. It is the striving itself that is fundamental. We want, we reach, we anticipate, and when we achieve what we wanted, the satisfaction is brief, and the wanting resumes, usually toward something else, or toward the same thing again, slightly transformed. This is not a flattering picture, but it is a recognizable one. You may notice, in the quiet of the night, that the mind does not simply worry about one thing and then settle once it has considered that thing adequately. It moves from one concern to another, from one imagined scenario to the next, as though the goal is not resolution, but motion itself. The mind seems to need something to turn over, to examine, to anticipate. This quality of ceaseless orientation toward what is next, what Schopenhauer would recognize as the expression of will in consciousness, is worth examining without judgment. It is not a problem to be fixed. It is, on this account, something close to the basic character of conscious life. When you picture yourself in the night, moving through possible futures, you are doing what Schopenhauer's framework would predict. The will, manifesting in consciousness, reaches toward something not yet arrived. It finds the future, which is perpetually not yet arrived, and it occupies itself there. This is not anxiety in the clinical sense. It is something older than that. A structural feature of a consciousness that is always oriented toward what comes next. We are like a man running downhill who cannot keep on his legs unless he runs on, and will inevitably fall if he stops. Arthur Schopenhauer, The World as Will and Representation. That image, a man running downhill who must keep moving to stay upright, is worth holding for a moment. It describes a kind of momentum that exists beneath deliberate thought. The mind is not always choosing to anticipate. In many cases, anticipation is simply what a moving mind does when the present offers it insufficient resistance. The future is always less defined, less crowded, more available. And so the momentum of consciousness carries forward into it. Alfred Adler, writing in the early 20th century, approached this differently, but arrived at a related observation. Adler was a psychologist and a philosopher of sorts, and he was interested in the way human beings orient themselves not by what has happened in the past, but by what they expect, hope for, or fear in the future. He called this teleological orientation, from the Greek word telos, meaning end or goal. For Adler, you cannot understand a person's behavior by looking only at their history. You must understand what they are reaching toward, what future they are imagining, what outcome they are preparing themselves for. The human mind, on Adler's account, is fundamentally future-oriented. We are pulled forward by our anticipations as much as we are pushed by our histories. This offers a slightly different angle on the nighttime mind. When you find yourself working through possible scenarios in the quiet hours, you are, in Adler's terms, orienting yourself toward a future you have not yet fully defined. The imagined conversations, the rehearsed responses, the pictured outcomes, these are all acts of forward orientation. They are the mind trying to find its footing in a future that is real in terms of its emotional weight, even though it is not yet real in terms of its facts. There is something quietly important in that distinction. Real in emotional weight, but not yet real in facts. When you imagine a difficult conversation going badly, the discomfort you feel is not imaginary. The tension in the body, the slight quickening of thought, the low weight that settles somewhere in the chest. These are real responses. They are happening now, in the body that is lying quietly in a dark room. And yet the thing they are responding to does not yet exist. Adler would say this is because the mind does not wait for facts to arrive before it begins to respond to them. It generates a working version of the future based on what it knows, what it fears, what it hopes, and it responds to that version as though it were already present. This is, in some ways, a remarkable capacity. It allows planning, preparation, and the anticipation of consequences before they occur. It is, in the evolutionary sense, enormously useful. But it is also the source of a particular kind of suffering that Schopenhauer would have recognized immediately. The suffering of being already inside a future that has not yet arrived, of living for a time in a version of tomorrow that the mind has constructed, rather than in the actual, quiet, undramatic present of the darkened room. The Stoic philosophers, writing long before either Schopenhauer or Adler, had a clear understanding of this dynamic, though they described it in different terms. Marcus Aurelius, writing private notes to himself that we now know as the Meditations, returned again and again to the problem of imagined suffering. His counsel was not that the imagination should be suppressed, but that it should be recognized as imagination. The thing itself, whatever tomorrow holds, is not yet here. Only the thought of it is here, now, in this moment. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Marcus Aurelius, Meditations. There is a version of this counsel that can feel like dismissal, as though the Stoic is simply saying, "Stop worrying, it hasn't happened yet." But that misses what Marcus Aurelius was actually doing in those private writings. He was not dismissing the forward-reaching mind. He was examining it with great care. He was trying to understand why a thought about the future should produce a response in the present body. He was sitting quietly, with the strangeness of the fact that imagination and reality can produce similar feelings, and asking what that means about the nature of the mind. And the answer, for the Stoics, was not that the mind should become still and empty. They were not advocating for the absence of thought. They were suggesting a kind of clarity about what is actually happening. To know that you are responding to a thought, not to an event, is already a form of perspective. Not a solution, but a slight shift in the relationship between the thinker and the thought. Consider someone lying awake with a decision they have been circling for days. Not a dramatic decision, perhaps, but one of those persistent ones that seem to resist resolution. Each time they approach it in thought, it turns slightly, revealing a new angle, a new consideration, a new reason to continue thinking about it rather than simply acting. They know somewhere that the thinking itself is not producing clarity. They have been thinking about this for 3 days, and clarity remains roughly as far away as it was at the beginning. And yet the mind returns. Schopenhauer would recognize this immediately. The will finds its object and returns to it, not because returning will resolve anything, but because the returning is the will's natural motion. The mind that keeps circling is not being irrational. It is being characteristic. It is doing what consciousness does when it is in contact with something unresolved and important. Adler might add, and this person is rehearsing their future self. They are not merely thinking about the decision. They are, at a level beneath deliberate thought, preparing themselves for the self they will become once the decision is made. They are trying on possible futures, checking how they sit. Neither description makes the circling stop, but both offer a kind of company in it, a recognition that what is happening is not strange or broken, but deeply, characteristically human. It is worth pausing for a moment on the specific character of nighttime anticipation as distinct from daytime anticipation. The same thought, held during a busy afternoon, often feels manageable. It presents itself, it is acknowledged, it is set aside in favor of whatever immediate task is at hand. The mind files it away as something to be returned to, and then the day intervenes, and the thought recedes into the background. But at night, the filing mechanism works differently. The things that were set aside during the day find in the quiet a certain prominence. They rise. They are not louder, exactly, but they are relatively larger, because everything else has grown small. The concern about a professional relationship that was a minor note in a full symphony of daytime experience becomes, in the silence, something much more difficult to place in proportion. Schopenhauer would recognize this immediately. The will, expressing itself through consciousness, finds less to occupy it in the quiet hours, and so the things that have not been resolved, that the will has not yet fully processed, grow larger in its attention. They do not grow more dangerous. They grow more prominent. The scaling is a matter of proportion, not of actual weight. This is one of the more practically useful observations available in the philosophy of anticipation. The size of a concern in the night is not an accurate measurement of its actual significance. It is a measurement of its relative prominence in a field that has otherwise gone quiet. The same concern, encountered in the middle of a full and occupied day, would register at a fraction of its nighttime magnitude, not because it is less real in the day, but because it has more company. Adler would have an additional observation to offer here. He understood the human being as fundamentally a social creature, oriented not just toward a personal future, but toward a future involving others. His concept of social interest described the way human beings care about their place in relation to others, their sense of belonging, contribution, and connection. And many of the things the nighttime mind worries about are, at root, social. They concern relationships. They concern how one will be perceived. They concern belonging and rejection, cooperation and conflict, the small and large negotiations of social existence. When someone lies awake imagining how a colleague will respond to something they said, or how a friend interpreted an ambiguous message, or how a difficult conversation tomorrow might affect a relationship they value, they are doing exactly what Adler would expect. They are a social being in the process of orienting itself toward the social future. The concern is not vanity or weakness. It is the natural activity of a mind that understands itself as existing in relation to others, and that takes those relations seriously enough to prepare for them with care. This is an important reframing. quiet though it is. The nighttime rehearsal of social scenarios is not a symptom of excessive self-consciousness. It is evidence of genuine investment in the quality of one's relationships. The mind that does not care how tomorrow's conversation goes does not spend the night preparing for it. Only the mind that cares does this. The preparation is, in this sense, a form of respect for what matters. Stoic philosophy offers one more thing worth noting in this context. Epictetus, who was a Stoic philosopher and a former slave, wrote with particular clarity about the distinction between what is within our power and what is not. His simple formulation was that some things are up to us and some things are not. What is up to us is our own response, our own judgment, our own orientation. What is not up to us is the external world, including other people's responses, the outcomes of situations we cannot fully control, and the behavior of the future itself. This distinction is often received as a comfort, and it can be. But Epictetus was honest enough to know that the distinction does not make the non-up-to-us things disappear from the mind. He was not saying, stop caring about outcomes you cannot fully control. He was saying something more subtle. Notice which part of the situation is genuinely yours to influence, and attend carefully to that part. Let the rest move as it will. The nighttime mind that is working through anticipated scenarios is often doing something close to this, though not always with the clarity Epictetus would have preferred. It is trying to identify what it can do, what it can say, how it can prepare, where its own agency lies. This is not futile. The rehearsal has value up to a point, because it genuinely does clarify what is within one's power and what is not. The problem, if there is one, is that the rehearsal often continues past the point of clarity into the territory of pure repetition, returning to the same questions without finding new answers, because the new answers cannot be found until the situation itself provides them. That is not a failure of the rehearsal. It is the natural limit of preparation in the face of genuine uncertainty. The mind has done what it can do in the night. It has turned the question over carefully. It has identified what is within its power. It has noticed what is not. And then, because the uncertainty remains, it turns the question over again. Not because a new answer is expected, but because the question is still open, and the mind cannot yet leave it. Let that rest quietly for a moment. Henri Bergson was a French philosopher working at the turn of the 20th century, and he won the Nobel Prize for Literature, which is unusual for a philosopher. He was interested in time, not as we usually think of it, not as a sequence of measurable units, but as something lived, something experienced from the inside. He made a distinction that is worth moving through slowly, because it illuminates something important about what happens in the quiet hours. Bergson distinguished between two kinds of time. There is what he called clock time, the time of calendars and schedules, measurable and external, the kind of time that tells you it is 3 a.m. and you have been lying awake for 2 hours. And then there is what he called duration, la durée, in French, which is time as it is actually experienced from the inside. This time is not measured. It is felt, and it does not move in straight lines. Duration is the experience of time as a continuous flow in which past, present, and future are not cleanly separated but blended. When you experience a piece of music, you are not hearing each note in isolation. Each note arrives carrying the memory of the notes before it and the anticipation of the notes to come. The music exists in time, but your experience of it is not sequential in any simple sense. It is a kind of living through, a duration, in which the music is simultaneously what has just been and what is still coming. Now apply this to the quiet mind at night. When the mind is moving through tomorrow's anticipated situations, it is not operating in clock time. It is operating in duration. And in duration, the imagined future does not feel distant. It does not feel like something that will arrive in 8 hours. It feels present. It feels like something you are already inside. This is one of the more useful observations Bergson offers. The reason the future feels so vivid at night, the reason imagined scenarios carry real emotional weight, is not a failure of rationality. It is a feature of how consciousness actually experiences time. The mind is not a photograph that captures only the current moment. It is more like a flowing river, carrying everything it has touched and anticipating everything it is moving toward. When you are lying in the dark, thinking about tomorrow, you are not standing outside time and looking at tomorrow from a safe distance. You are inside duration. And inside duration, tomorrow is not far away. It is already, in some experiential sense, here. Pure duration is the form which the succession of our conscious states assumes when our ego lets itself live, when it refrains from separating its present state from its former states. Henri Bergson, Time and Free Will, 1889. There is something gently clarifying in that passage when you let it breathe. When the ego lets itself live, when it does not separate the present state from what came before and what is coming, the result is duration. And duration, by its nature, carries everything together. The past is not gone. The future is not absent. They are both folded into the experience of now. This has a practical implication for the nighttime mind that is worth sitting with. The sharpness with which the future is felt, the clarity of the imagined conversation, the vividness of the anticipated scenario. These are not distortions. They are what happens when consciousness is functioning in its natural mode of duration, without the usual external interruptions that would pull it back to the surface of the immediate present. During the day, the experience of duration is constantly interrupted. Something pulls attention back to the present. A notification, a voice, a task that needs doing. These interruptions keep the mind from settling too deeply into any one stream of duration. But at night, without these interruptions, the mind settles, and it settles into the deepest available current, which is the stream of unresolved anticipation. Think about the experience of waiting. Not the comfortable kind of waiting, but the kind where something uncertain is coming. A medical result, an important conversation, an outcome that genuinely could go either way. In those periods of waiting, the experience of time changes. It slows in some ways and accelerates in others. The present moment feels thin, barely there, a kind of transparent window onto a future that looms larger than it should. Bergson would say this is duration working correctly. The mind, when genuinely oriented toward something coming, compresses the distance between present and future. The future leans toward you in time the way a sound leans toward you in space when you are listening carefully for it. There is also something in Bergson's thought about memory that connects to this. He understood memory not as a warehouse of stored events, separate from present experience, but as something active, something that flows continuously into the present. The past is not behind us in the way we often picture it. It is folded into the present, shaping it, coloring it, without necessarily announcing itself. When you lie in the quiet and find your mind moving through a possible future scenario, the scenario is built inevitably from the past, from other conversations you have had, other situations you have navigated, other moments where something similar was at stake. The imagined future is constructed from remembered experience, running through the present and projecting forward, past, present, and future, all folded together in duration. This is why the same worries tend to return in roughly the same form. The mind does not simply generate new futures each time it reaches forward. It tends to draw on its accumulated experience of similar situations, and those memories carry their own emotional textures. A past conversation that went badly will lend its coloring to an anticipated future conversation of a similar kind. The mind is not making things up entirely. It is drawing on a deep archive. Consider someone who has been in a particular kind of conflict before, say a professional disagreement that became uncomfortable. They are now anticipating a meeting that has the structural feel of that earlier situation. In duration, the two situations are not cleanly separated. The remembered experience flows into the anticipation. The emotional weight of the past colors the imagined future. The person is not thinking about two separate things. They are inside one continuous flow that carries both. From the outside, this might look like catastrophizing, or like the mind running away with itself. But from inside duration, it is simply the way time is experienced when consciousness is given the freedom to flow uninterrupted. The mind is not being careless. It is being thorough. It is including everything it knows, from every time it knows it, in its construction of what might come. Bergson's insight does not make this less uncomfortable, but it does make it less strange. The vividness of anticipated scenarios, the way they carry real emotional weight even though they have not yet occurred, the way the future seems to press against the present with a kind of impatience. These are all features of duration. They are the natural texture of a consciousness that does not live in a single, isolated now. There is a particular quality to the night that Bergson's framework illuminates more than any other framework I have encountered. In the day, there is clock time. There are appointments and schedules, a before and an after, a clear sense of where you are in the measured sequence of hours. But in the dark, the clock becomes less relevant. The quality of the darkness is roughly the same at midnight as it is at 3, and the silence is similar, and the stillness is similar. Clock time dissolves a little, and when clock time dissolves, duration takes over. The present opens outward in both directions. The past becomes more present, and the future becomes less distant. Things that happened years ago can feel in the quiet as though they were yesterday, and things that are coming next month can feel with equal vividness as though they are already pressing against the door. This is not confusion. This is duration doing what it naturally does when the scaffolding of clock time is removed. The mind settles into its own temporality, which is richer, more layered, and considerably less tidy than the hours on a clock. You may find your mind returning to that image. The clock dissolves a little in the dark, and what remains is a richer, less tidy experience of time. Everything that matters to you exists in that duration, all at once, in varying degrees of proximity. Not behind you and in front of you, but around you, present in varying degrees of weight and nearness. Bergson had something else to offer, something that connects duration to what he called intuition. In his framework, intuition was not mystical. It was a particular way of knowing that is distinct from analytical thought. Analytical thought breaks things apart. It divides experience into components and examines each one. Intuition, by contrast, enters into the flow of things directly, moving with them rather than around them. It is, in a sense, the way of knowing that duration itself enables. When you lie in the dark and the mind moves through anticipated futures, there are two things happening simultaneously. One is analytical. The mind is breaking the situation into its components, examining each variable, checking each possible outcome. But there is also something else happening alongside this, something harder to name, a kind of felt sense of the situation as a whole, an intuition, in Bergson's sense, of where things are moving, what the shape of tomorrow might be, how it might feel to be inside it. This intuitive layer of anticipation is often undervalued because it is harder to articulate. When someone says they have a feeling about how something will go, they are often dismissed, even by themselves, in favor of the more articulable analytical assessment. But Bergson would suggest that the intuition carries information too, that the felt sense of a situation, accessed through the flow of duration, has a kind of accuracy that the analytical breakdown can miss, because it takes the whole into account rather than only its parts. This does not mean that every intuition is correct, or that felt senses about the future should override careful thinking. Bergson was not arguing for credulity. He was arguing for a more complete picture of how consciousness knows things. The analytical and the intuitive work together, and in the quiet hours of the night, both are active. The rehearsed scenarios are the analytical layer. The quieter felt sense running beneath them, harder to catch and name, is the intuitive layer. You may notice, if you attend to it, that there is sometimes a discrepancy between these two layers. The analytical mind might construct a scenario that seems objectively likely, based on available evidence. And yet something in the intuitive layer quietly dissents. Or the reverse. The analytical mind might produce reasons for optimism that the intuitive layer does not quite endorse. These discrepancies are not arbitrary. They are the mind trying to integrate different kinds of knowing into a coherent orientation toward the future. The sleepless hours are, in this sense, part of that integration. The mind is not simply running the same scenario on repeat. It is, at a level that is not always fully conscious, cross-referencing the analytical and the intuitive, checking them against each other, looking for a version of the anticipated future that holds together at both levels. This is effortful work. It is one reason the mind cannot simply be instructed to stop. There is also something in Bergson's thinking about the relationship between time and memory that speaks to why certain worries have a particular cyclical quality. He understood memory not as the storage of static images, but as something dynamic and continuous. The past does not sit behind us in a warehouse. It follows us. It flows alongside us. And when a situation arises in the present that resembles something from the past, the two flow together in duration, blending their qualities in ways that are not always transparent to conscious awareness. This is why certain anticipated situations carry a weight that seems disproportionate to their current circumstances. The situation being faced now may not, objectively, be the most serious situation this person has faced. But if it carries structural resemblance to an earlier situation that was genuinely serious, the emotional weight of that earlier experience flows into the present one through the continuity of duration. The two cannot be fully separated, because in duration they are not separate. They share a current. Understanding this does not always reduce the weight, but it can shift the relationship to it. When the weight of an anticipated future seems larger than the current circumstances seem to justify, it is worth asking quietly, what else might be flowing in the same current? What older experience might be lending its weight to this present anticipation? Not as a therapeutic exercise, but simply as a form of understanding, as a way of recognizing that the experience of the night is richer and more layered than any single worry can account for. The room is still. The night continues. There is no hurry. Baruch Spinoza was a 17th century philosopher who was, in his own time, considered profoundly radical. He was expelled from his community for his ideas and spent his life in relative isolation, grinding lenses for a living and writing philosophy that would not be fully understood for generations. What he had to say about emotions and imagination is, in many ways, still being absorbed. Spinoza understood emotions as fundamentally bound up with ideas, not separate from thought, but continuous with it. When you feel something, you are also, in some form, thinking something. The two are not cleanly separable. And what you think about, what ideas you hold in mind, shapes what you feel, even when the ideas concern things that are not present, things that are imagined, things that have not happened. He described a category of what he called passive emotions. Emotions that arise not from our own active engagement with reality, but from our imagination of what reality might bring. When we imagine something bad coming, we feel fear or dread, even though the bad thing has not arrived. When we imagine something good coming, we feel hope or anticipation, even though the good thing is equally absent. The emotion is generated by the idea, not by the thing itself. This is, at first, an obvious observation. Of course, we feel things in response to our imagination, but Spinoza's deeper point is subtler. He is saying that the emotion generated by an imagined future is not a pale imitation of the emotion we would feel if that future actually arrived. It can be, in many cases, just as strong, just as real in its effects on the body and the mind. The imagination, when it is vivid and engaged, produces genuine emotional responses, not lesser versions of the real thing. This is why the quiet hours can feel weighty. The things you are imagining are not trivial thoughts passing through. They are ideas that Spinoza would say your mind is holding with a degree of conviction. And that conviction generates genuine emotional response. The tension in the chest, the slight agitation in the body, the difficulty settling. These are not symptoms of weakness. They are the predictable products of a mind holding vivid ideas about uncertain futures. He who has a true idea simultaneously knows that he has a true idea, and cannot doubt of the truth of the thing perceived. Baruch Spinoza, Ethics, 1677. The quote lands in an interesting place when you consider it in this context. The imagined scenario, in the moment when the mind holds it with full conviction, has the quality of a true idea. The mind does not experience it as speculation or fiction. It experiences it as a possibility so real that it deserves to be responded to, prepared for, taken seriously. And so, the emotional apparatus responds faithfully to what the mind is presenting it with. Michel de Montaigne, writing about a century before Spinoza, arrived at a related observation through a very different route. Montaigne was not a systematic philosopher. He was an essayist, in a very deep sense of that word, someone who tested ideas by feeling their weight in his own experience. And he had a great deal to say about the imagination and the suffering it creates. He wrote in one of his most famous essays that we are more troubled by our imagination than by the reality of things. He noticed, in himself and in others, that the anticipation of pain is often worse than the pain itself, that the imagined version of a difficult thing tends to arrive with greater dramatic weight than the actual version, which comes cluttered with practical details, accidental circumstances, unexpected moments of ease. My life has been filled with terrible misfortunes, most of which never happened. Michel de Montaigne, Essays. The line is often attributed to Montaigne, though the exact phrasing varies across translations and editions. The thought, wherever it originates precisely, is one of the most economically accurate descriptions of the nighttime mind that has ever been offered. The life lived in imagination, in the quiet hours of anticipation, is often populated with versions of misfortune that never quite materialize as imagined. And yet knowing this does not stop the imagining. That is what makes Montaigne's observation so honest. He's not saying, once you understand that your imagination exaggerates, you will stop imagining exaggerated things. He is simply noting it, simply observing the pattern with the mild, curious attention that he brought to most of what he observed about human nature. Spinoza and Montaigne, coming from different centuries and with different methods, both arrive at the same fundamental observation. The emotional weight of an imagined future is not proportional to the probability of that future occurring. The mind generates genuine emotional responses to possibilities, not only to actualities. And the most vivid possibilities tend to be the ones that concern us most, which means they generate the strongest responses, which means they are the ones the mind returns to most readily. There is a kind of loop in this that is worth recognizing. The more emotionally charged an anticipated scenario, the more vivid it becomes in imagination. The more vivid it is, the more often the mind returns to it. The more often the mind returns to it, the more emotionally familiar it becomes, which can make it feel more real, more inevitable, more deserving of the attention being given to it. The Stoics had a practice for this that is worth mentioning, though not as a prescription. They called it negative visualization, the deliberate imagining of unwanted outcomes, not to dwell on them, but to examine them carefully enough to remove their power to surprise. Marcus Aurelius practiced something like this. He would, in his private writings, deliberately contemplate the loss of things he valued, not to suffer preventively, but to understand the nature of his attachment to them. The interesting thing about this practice is what it reveals. When you sit with an imagined negative outcome long enough, something often shifts. The scenario that felt unbearable in the first rush of anticipation begins, under sustained and calm examination, to reveal its actual dimensions. It is usually smaller than the initial imagining, more manageable, more specific, less apocalyptic. Spinoza would explain this in terms of understanding. When the mind moves from passive emotion, which is driven by unexamined imagination, to active understanding, which involves looking clearly at what is actually being imagined, the emotional landscape changes. Not because the imagined thing becomes less likely, but because the mind's relationship to it has shifted from reactive to reflective. This is a subtle distinction, and it is not a cure for anything. The shift from reactive to reflective does not guarantee calm, but it changes the quality of the experience. The imagined future becomes slightly more like an idea being examined, and slightly less like a reality already underway. There is something else in Montaigne's thinking that is worth moving through slowly. He wrote with a great deal of honesty about the gap between what we fear and what actually happens, not as a reassurance, but as an observation about the particular nature of the imagination. He noticed that imagined suffering tends to be clean. It has a narrative shape. There is a clear bad thing that happens, and then there is suffering that follows from it in a clear and traceable line. But actual experience is never this clean. Actual difficult events arrive accompanied by unexpected kindness, by moments of unexpected competence, by the presence of people who help, by the accidental discovery that one is more capable than anticipated. The narrative of imagined suffering is a simplified version that the actual event never quite resembles. This is not an argument that things always work out. They do not always work out. Montaigne knew this as well as anyone. He lived in an era of plague and civil war, and watched people he loved die in circumstances far from comfortable. He was not a naive optimist. He was simply noting that the imagination, when it constructs its version of a feared future, tends to strip away the texture of actual experience. It produces something cleaner and more severe than life usually is. Think about someone lying awake, imagining a conversation they believe will be painful. They imagine the other person's words. They imagine their own responses falling short. They imagine the scene reaching its most uncomfortable possible conclusion. What they do not imagine, because it is harder to imagine in advance, is the small moments that will punctuate even a difficult conversation. The pause where something unexpected is said. The moment where the other person reveals something they had not expected to reveal. The way actual human interaction tends to deviate always from the script that was anticipated. The imagination builds its stage sets in advance, and they are always more monolithic, more final than the actual stage. The actual stage is messy and contingent and full of details that no one thought to include. This is not a reason to stop imagining. It is simply a feature of how imagination works and how life differs from it. Spinoza had a related observation about the nature of what he called hope and fear, which he treated as two sides of the same coin. Hope, in his framework, is not a positive emotion in the straightforward sense. It is the pleasurable anticipation of an outcome that is genuinely uncertain, and fear is the painful anticipation of an outcome that is also genuinely uncertain. The uncertainty is the key element in both. Remove the uncertainty, and both hope and fear dissolve. A certain good is simply good. A certain bad is simply bad. It is only the uncertain ones that generate the sustained emotional weather of hope and fear. This observation has a quiet importance for the nighttime mind. The things you are hoping for and the things you are fearing are, by definition, uncertain. If they were certain, the emotional weather would be different. It is the openness of the outcome, the genuine, not yet decidedness of it, that generates the sustained anticipation. And this means that the emotional weight of the night is, in a specific sense, a measure of how much is still genuinely open in your life. A life from which all uncertainty has been removed would be, Spinoza implies, a life from which both hope and fear have been removed. It would be a life without the particular emotional aliveness that comes from genuinely not knowing how something will resolve. Some people, when they hear this, feel a small and unexpected recognition. The anxiety of uncertainty is real. But so, sometimes, is the vitality of it. The fact that you do not know how tomorrow will go means that tomorrow is still in some sense unwritten. That possibility is present in both directions. Montaigne, meanwhile, had a great deal more to say about the specific character of anticipation as opposed to the experience of the thing anticipated. He returned to this in several of his essays, approaching it from different angles. As he tended to approach most things, he found genuinely interesting. He was a man of considerable self-knowledge, and one of the things he knew about himself was that his imagination was prolific and not always helpful. It produced suffering he had not asked for, and distress that bore little relationship to what actually arrived. He wrote about illness with particular clarity. Having suffered various physical complaints throughout his life, he noticed that the imagined version of his ill health was often more oppressive than the actual experience. The anticipation of pain, he found, had a kind of totalizing quality that the actual pain, when it arrived, usually did not have. Actual pain was specific. It was here, in this part of the body, at this particular intensity, leaving these other parts relatively free. The imagined pain was diffuse, pervasive, without edges. He generalized from this observation to other forms of anticipated difficulty, and the generalization holds. When we imagine something difficult coming, we often imagine it without the specificity of the actual experience. We imagine a kind of general bad, a pervading, uncomfortable atmosphere, rather than the particular, bounded, specific thing that will actually arrive. And the general bad is, in many ways, harder to bear than the specific one. It has no edges to push against. It fills the available space. This is one of the more practically illuminating observations in the entire tradition we have been moving through. The imagined difficulty tends to be diffuse. The actual difficulty tends to be specific, and the specific is almost always more manageable than the diffuse, not because it is smaller, but because it has a shape. You can find your footing against something with a shape. against the shapeless general anxiety of anticipated difficulty, there is nowhere to put your weight. Montaigne's response to this was not to discipline the imagination into silence. He did not believe that was possible, and he was honest enough to say so. His response was something closer to curiosity. He treated his own imagined sufferings as objects of study. He watched them, described them, noticed their particular character, and their relationship to the actual experiences they preceded, not as a method for reducing them, but as a way of being interested in them rather than simply oppressed by them. This is a form of the Stoic move, but softer, where Marcus Aurelius brought philosophical rigor to the examination of his own mind. Montaigne brought a kind of gentle, self-amused curiosity. Here I am, he seems to say, imagining terrible things again. Let me look at what I am imagining and how I am imagining it. Not because the looking will make it stop, but because the looking is itself a way of being present with what is happening, rather than simply being inside it without distance. Spinoza, building toward his ethics over many years, had a broader framework for all of this that is worth touching briefly. He believed that the path from what he called bondage to freedom, in an emotional and intellectual sense, ran through understanding, not through willpower or suppression or the cultivation of indifference, but through the development of clear and adequate ideas. When the mind holds clear ideas, ideas that are well formed and connected accurately to their causes, it is in a different state than when it holds confused or partial ideas. Most of the ideas generated in anticipatory worry are, in Spinoza's terms, confused. They are partial images of possible futures, stripped of context and nuance, held with more conviction than their uncertainty warrants. When the mind holds a clear idea of what it is actually facing, including its genuine uncertainty, its actual dimensions, the specific things that are within and beyond one's influence, the emotional landscape shifts. Not because the situation improves, but because the mind is now in more accurate contact with it. The movement from confused anticipation to clear understanding is not a movement away from feeling. Spinoza was clear about this. Adequate ideas carry their own emotional character. Understanding something genuinely difficult can itself be genuinely painful. But the pain of clear understanding is different from the pain of confused anticipation. It has edges. It is specific. It is in proportion to what is actually at stake, rather than inflated by the shapelessness of imagination. This is, perhaps, the most that philosophy can honestly offer on this question. Not relief, not the quieting of the forward-reaching mind, but the possibility of a slightly more accurate relationship between the mind and what it is anticipating. The exchange of the diffuse and shapeless for the specific and proportionate, which is a different form of night than the one in which confused fear fills the available space without boundary. You may find your mind returning to that thought in the coming days. Let it arrive when it does. Existential philosophy, as a tradition, is not primarily concerned with anxiety in the therapeutic sense. It is concerned with something deeper, with the basic structure of human existence as it encounters its own fundamental conditions. And one of those conditions, perhaps the most pervasive one, is uncertainty. The future is genuinely, structurally, irreducibly open. Jean-Paul Sartre described human existence as fundamentally different from the existence of objects. A stone, he said, is fully what it is. It does not have possibilities. It does not project itself into a future. It simply is. But a human being is always, in some sense, ahead of itself, always in the process of becoming, always already oriented toward what it is not yet. This forward orientation, which Husserl identified in the structure of consciousness and which Schopenhauer recognized in the movement of the will, takes on a particular significance in existential thought. Because if the future is genuinely open, if you are always in the process of becoming rather than simply being, then the possibilities you hold in mind are not merely fantasies or fears. They are, in some meaningful sense, real candidates for what you might become. Sartre used the phrase condemned to be free. It is a phrase that sometimes unsettles people when they first encounter it. Freedom sounds like something desirable, not something to be condemned by. But what Sartre meant was that you cannot escape choosing. You cannot simply be the way a stone simply is. You are always, whether you acknowledge it or not, making yourself. And this making happens in the face of a genuinely open future that offers no guarantees. The anxiety that Sartre described is not a malfunction of the mind. It is what it feels like to be a being for whom the future is genuinely undecided. When you lie in the quiet and feel the weight of anticipated uncertainty, you are feeling, in his terms, the direct contact of your consciousness with the fact of your own freedom. The future has not been decided. You do not know what tomorrow holds with certainty. And the mind, feeling this, responds with something that resembles tension. Existence precedes essence. Man first of all exists, encounters himself, surges up in the world, and defines himself afterwards. Jean-Paul Sartre. Existentialism is a humanism, 1946. There is something quietly significant in that. You are not a finished thing. You are a thing still in the process of being made, partly by circumstance and partly by what you choose to do with circumstance. The anticipated future that occupies the mind in the quiet hours is not merely something that will happen to you. It is also something you will happen to. The two are in constant negotiation, and the negotiation has not yet been concluded. Martin Heidegger, a German philosopher of the 20th century, who shaped much of existential thought, had his own way of approaching this territory. He was interested in what he called thrownness, the condition of finding oneself already in a world, already in a particular situation, with a particular history and a particular set of circumstances, without having chosen any of it. You did not choose when or where to be born. You did not choose the conditions you were born into. You were thrown into existence. But alongside this thrownness, Heidegger placed what he called projection. The human being, thrown into its situation, is always projecting itself forward, always ahead of itself in its possibilities. Existence is always this tension between what was given and what might be, between the fixed conditions of arrival and the open possibilities of becoming. When you think about this in the context of the nighttime mind, something interesting emerges. The forward-reaching thought that keeps you awake is not simply worry. It is, in Heidegger's terms, projection. The mind casting itself forward into its possibilities, trying to understand what it might encounter there, trying to prepare itself for what the open future might hold. There is a particular kind of anticipation that is worth naming here. Not the anticipation of a specific feared event, but something more diffuse. The feeling of being in a period of change, or of standing at the edge of something whose shape is not yet clear. Many people recognize this. The sense that something is shifting, that the future is more open than usual, that the coming weeks or months are somehow less defined than they would like. In existential terms, this is a direct encounter with what the tradition calls facticity and transcendence. Facticity is what is fixed, the circumstances you are in, the choices already made, the situation as it is. Transcendence is the openness, the fact that the situation has not yet resolved, that possibilities remain genuinely possible, that what you will do has not been determined. The tension between these two is real. It is not a product of excessive imagination. It is the actual condition of being in the middle of something, which is where most of us are, most of the time, in the middle of a career, in the middle of a relationship, in the middle of a project, a plan, a period of life that has not yet arrived at its shape. Simone de Beauvoir, who worked alongside Sartre and developed her own existential philosophy, wrote about the nature of ambiguity in human existence. We exist, she observed, in a condition that is genuinely and permanently ambiguous. We are neither fully free nor fully determined. We are neither entirely the authors of our lives, nor entirely the subjects of forces beyond our control. We are somewhere in between, which is a more uncomfortable position than either extreme would be. The mind that worries about the future is, in de Beauvoir's framework, encountering this ambiguity directly. The question of what will happen is genuinely undecided, genuinely open to influence, but not entirely within anyone's control. And this openness is not a temporary condition that will resolve itself soon. It is the permanent condition of existence in time. This might sound like a cold observation, but there is something in it that is worth receiving slowly. If uncertainty is not an aberration, but a structural feature of existence, then the anxiety it produces is not a sign that something has gone wrong. It is a sign that you are in genuine contact with the nature of your situation, that you have not retreated into false certainty, that the openness of the future is being registered honestly by a mind that is paying attention. There is also something in the existential tradition about the relationship between anxiety and authenticity. Heidegger believed that anxiety, in its deepest form, was one of the few moods that brings you face to face with your own existence, rather than allowing you to hide from it in the busy distractions of daily life. When everything is quiet, and the future presses against the present with its full weight of uncertainty, you are, in a specific sense, more in contact with what your life actually is than you were during the hours when tasks and schedules kept the larger questions at bay. This is not a reason to seek out anxiety or to value it over contentment, but it is a reason to receive it with a degree of curiosity rather than only as something to be escaped. The weight of an anticipated uncertain future felt in the quiet hours is a form of presence, an encounter with the actual conditions of your life. The mind is not running away into fantasy. It is running toward something genuinely real, the open, undetermined shape of what comes next. There is a particular quality to the uncertainty that the existential tradition is most interested in, and it is worth spending a little more time with it. The uncertainty of the future is not simply the uncertainty of whether a specific event will occur. It is something more fundamental. It is the uncertainty of what kind of person you will be when you get there, what you will choose, how you will respond to what arrives, whether you will find, in yourself, the qualities you will need. This deeper uncertainty, the uncertainty about the self that will meet the future, is often the silent engine running beneath the more surface-level worry about events. When someone rehearses a difficult conversation in the quiet hours, they are not only wondering what the other person will say. They are wondering, at a level that may not even be fully conscious, whether they will be capable of responding well, whether they will find the right words when the words are needed, whether they will hold their composure, or their compassion, or their clarity when it matters most. This is a genuinely different kind of uncertainty than the uncertainty about events. Events can, to some degree, be predicted. Patterns can be recognized. Precedents can be consulted. But the self that will meet those events is always, in a small way, an unknown quantity. You have met difficult situations before. You have some evidence of how you respond to them. But you have not met this one, with its particular combination of circumstances and stakes and timing. And the question of who you will be in it is genuinely open. Sartre was clear about this in ways that can feel uncomfortable and clarifying in equal measure. He believed that there is no fixed self that precedes experience. There is no essential character waiting to be revealed. The self is constituted in the choices made in actual situations. You do not discover who you are. You make who you are in the moments when something is genuinely at stake and a choice must be made. This means that the anxiety of anticipation, at its deepest level, is the anxiety of not yet knowing what choice you will make. Not because you are fundamentally untrustworthy, but because the choice itself has not yet arrived. It is still ahead of you. And ahead of you, it is genuinely undecided. The self that will face tomorrow's difficulty is, in a very specific sense, not yet fully formed. There is something quietly important in receiving that idea with patience rather than urgency. The incompleteness of the self in the face of an anticipated future is not a deficit. It is the very condition that makes genuine choice possible. A self that was fully determined in advance could not choose. It could only execute. The fact that the future self is still being made is the same fact that makes your response to tomorrow genuinely yours, rather than merely the playing out of a fixed character. Kierkegaard, who preceded the existentialists in some important ways, and was in many respects their precursor, wrote about what he called the dizziness of freedom, the vertigo that arises when you stand at the edge of a genuine choice, when you feel the full weight of the fact that it is up to you, that no external authority will decide for you, that the future branching before you is branching because of what you will choose to do. This dizziness is not pleasant. But it is, Kierkegaard argued, the experience of genuine freedom, which is not comfortable in the way that we might prefer freedom to be. The nighttime mind that cannot settle is sometimes experiencing exactly this vertigo. Not in a dramatic sense. The stakes of tomorrow's meeting or tomorrow's conversation may be relatively modest, but in the specific sense that the outcome is genuinely undetermined. that it depends partly on what you will choose to do, and that the choosing has not yet happened, there is a real encounter with freedom happening in the dark. The mind feels its own openness, feels the not yet decidedness of the self. And this feeling, in Kierkegaard's framework, is precisely what it is like to be a free being facing a genuinely undecided future. De Beauvoir extended this in a direction that Kierkegaard perhaps did not fully reach. She was interested in the ambiguity of the human condition, not just in terms of individual freedom, but in terms of the entanglement of freedoms. Your freedom is always enacted in a world where others are also free. Your choices affect theirs, and theirs affect yours. And the anticipated future that the mind is working through is never entirely a matter of your own choosing. It is a negotiation, always, between your freedom and the freedom of others, between what you will bring and what they will bring, between the shape you are trying to give to things and the shape the situation will take regardless. This entanglement is part of what makes the nighttime rehearsal so difficult to complete. You can rehearse your own part. You can prepare your words, anticipate your own responses, clarify your own intentions. But you cannot rehearse the other person, because the other person is genuinely free and genuinely unpredictable, and no amount of careful preparation can fully account for what they will bring. The rehearsal runs up against this limit repeatedly. And the limit, frustrating though it is actually the sign of something important. That the people in your life are real and autonomous beings, not characters in a script you are writing, but genuine others whose responses are their own. That recognition, held quietly in the night, has a certain settling quality. The reason you cannot fully prepare is not a failure of imagination or diligence. It is a function of the genuine otherness of other people. You are preparing for a meeting with someone who is as real as you are, as free as you are, as unpredictable and rich and responsive as you are. The rehearsal is, in this sense, appropriate to what it is. A partial preparation for an encounter that cannot be fully rehearsed, because real encounters never can be. Albert Camus, who is sometimes grouped with the existentialists and sometimes resisted the label, wrote about the condition of living in the face of what he called the absurd, the gap between the human desire for clear meaning and the world's refusal to provide it. He believed that the honest response to this condition was not despair, but what he called revolt, a clear-eyed, ongoing engagement with life, despite its refusal to offer the certainty we would prefer. There is something in that image of revolt, understood quietly, that speaks to the nighttime mind. The mind that lies awake in the face of uncertain futures is not giving up. It is engaged. It is in the middle of something, and it knows it, and it is paying attention. That is not a small thing. The room is quiet. The breath is slow. There is a small distance between what is and what might be, and you are resting in that distance. There is a very old tradition of thought that originates in ancient China and runs through various forms across many centuries, which does not approach the question of anticipation and worry by examining its mechanisms or defending its presence. It approaches it from a different angle entirely. It approaches it by questioning the fundamental assumption that something needs to be done about it. The Tao Te Ching, attributed to a figure called Laozi, is one of the oldest and most translated texts in human history. It is short, and it is deceptively simple, and it contains almost no argument in the philosophical sense. It simply offers images and observations, and allows them to settle wherever they settle. It does not insist. At the center of Taoist thought is a concept called Wu Wei, which is usually translated as non-action, or effortless action, or acting in accord with the natural flow of things. It is often misunderstood as passivity, as a counsel to do nothing. But that is not quite it. Wu Wei is more like the absence of forcing, the willingness to let things move in the direction they are already moving, rather than applying effort against that movement. Consider the way water moves. It does not force its way through obstacles. It finds the available space and moves through it. It does not resist the shape of the riverbed. It accepts the shape and moves along it. And in doing so, over time, it shapes the very rock it seemed to simply accept. The river that does not force anything eventually carves a canyon. Now hold that image alongside the mind at night. The mind that is moving through anticipated futures, turning over possible scenarios, cycling through the same questions from slightly different angles. The usual impulse, when we notice this happening, is to try to stop it, to close down the thoughts, to redirect attention, to force the mind toward sleep or toward stillness. And the mind, encountering this force, often resists it. The thoughts come back more insistently. The effort to still the mind can sometimes produce a kind of mental noise more disruptive than the original thoughts were. The Taoist perspective does not prescribe anything. But if it were to offer an observation about this, it might say simply, "The river is flowing. Trying to hold back the river does not stop the river. It only produces turbulence at the point of resistance. To the mind that is still, the whole universe surrenders." Laozi, Tao Te Ching. What is interesting about this line is the order of events. The mind is still first. The surrender follows. Not force the mind to stillness, and then receive quietude as a reward. Simply, when the mind finds its stillness, the universe yield. The stillness is not the product of effort. It is what happens when effort is released. This is a different kind of wisdom than any of the other thinkers we have moved through tonight. Husserl and James described the structure of the moving mind. Schopenhauer and Adler described its orientation and purpose. Bergson described its relationship to time. Spinoza and Montaigne described the emotional landscape it creates. The existential thinkers described the genuine openness that the forward-reaching mind is responding to. All of these perspectives are illuminating in their own ways. They all increase understanding. But the Taoist perspective does not seek to increase understanding in the same way. It offers something more like a different relationship to what is happening. Not a new analysis, but a new posture. The posture that Taoism suggests, without insisting, is something like allowing, not approving of the worry or celebrating the anticipation, not deciding that everything is fine or that the concerns are unimportant, simply allowing the river to flow, which it will do regardless, and resting in the awareness of that flow rather than struggling against it. This is, in practice, a very quiet thing. It does not require a decision or an action. It is more like a loosening, a slight release of the grip that the mind has on the process of its own movement. The thoughts about tomorrow continue, The imagined scenarios continue, but the relationship to them shifts, almost imperceptibly, from resistance to observation. When you observe a thought rather than being entirely inside it, something changes. The thought does not stop. The content does not change. But there is a slight space between the thinker and the thought, a thin membrane of awareness that registers. This is what the mind is doing right now. And that registration, that simple noticing, is already a form of the stillness that Laozi described. There is another strand of Taoist thought that speaks to the nature of anticipation specifically. The tradition has a great deal to say about the relationship between action and timing. There is a concept called the appropriate moment, the time when something is ready to happen, when action will be effective because it is moving with the natural flow rather than against it. Many of the things the nighttime mind is working through are questions of timing as much as questions of content. Not just what to do, but when. Not just what to say, but whether the moment has arrived. The mind rehearses conversations that have not yet found their right moment. It anticipates outcomes that depend on circumstances not yet in place. It tries to prepare for a future that is genuinely not yet ready to be met. The Taoist observation about this is gentle. The appropriate moment will arrive. Things are moving in the direction they are moving. The preparation that feels urgent at 3 in the morning is often preparation for a situation that will not arise tomorrow, or next week, or in the form anticipated. The mind is working ahead of the river, trying to prepare the banks for water that has not yet turned this way. This is not a counsel to be unprepared. The Taoist tradition is not a tradition of carelessness. It is a tradition of right timing, of action that is responsive to what is actually present, rather than reactive to what might be coming. The difference is subtle, but meaningful. The prepared mind that responds to what actually arrives is more effective than the exhausted mind that spent the night preparing for versions of the future that did not quite materialize. The river is flowing. The future is coming. The night is here, and it is quiet, and the body is at rest, even if the mind is not entirely. These are all true at once. They do not contradict each other. The movement of the mind does not prevent the rest of the body. The forward-reaching thought does not change the quietness of the room. Both exist simultaneously, the motion and the stillness, the reaching and the resting. There is a final image from the Taoist tradition that feels appropriate for the end of a long reflection on the forward-reaching mind. It is the image of water and stone, which appears in several forms across Taoist texts and related traditions. Water, the texts suggest, is the most powerful force in the natural world, not because it is hard or aggressive, but because it is yielding. It takes the shape of whatever contains it. It flows around obstacles rather than through them, and over time, its patient movement shapes the hardest rock. The mind that moves through imagined futures in the quiet hours is, in this image, more like the water than like the stone. Its movement is natural. Its yielding is not weakness. And its patient circulation through the same terrain, returning to the same questions, feeling for the available openings, is not a sign of being stuck. It may be the deepest form of preparation available, the kind that does not force, does not demand, does not insist on resolution before the resolution is ready to arrive. And so we arrive, after a long journey through many centuries and many minds, at something that does not look like a conclusion because it was never meant to be one. The forward-reaching mind reaches. The blurring of time blurs. The emotional weight of possibility is genuine and real. The uncertainty of the future is not an illusion to be corrected. And the river of thought flows, finding its own level, seeking its own course. All of this is happening right now, in this room, in this body, in this particular moment of the night. And it is not a problem. It is not something wrong. It is the experience of a conscious, caring, future-oriented being, awake in the small hours, in genuine contact with the conditions of its own life. Marcus Aurelius, who returned again and again in his private writings to the same questions he could never fully quiet, who wrote down his contemplations, not because they resolved anything, but because the contemplation itself was valuable, might have recognized this night. He spent many of his own nights with the forward-reaching mind. He knew the returning thoughts. He knew the imagined scenarios. He knew the weight of uncertain futures held in the body at rest. And he kept writing, not because writing solved anything, but because thinking carefully about one's condition is its own form of dignity, its own form of being present with what is real. Schopenhauer, for all his unsparing observations about the restless will, also understood that consciousness itself, the fact of being aware of the river rather than simply being the river, was something remarkable. The mind that worries is the same mind that can observe the worrying, and the observation, in its quiet, steady way, is already something other than the worry itself. Bergson would say that even in this moment, you are inside duration. Past, present, and imagined future all folded together in a continuous flow that is your experience of being alive in time. The anticipated tomorrow is already here, in a sense, and the memories that built the anticipation are here too, and the present moment of the dark room is here, and all three exist simultaneously in the rich temporality of a consciousness that does not live in a single now. Spinoza might say that every idea held in the mind with genuine conviction produces genuine emotional response, and that this is not a flaw, but the nature of a mind that is engaged with its own existence. The emotions generated by imagined futures are real emotions. They deserve to be received with the same seriousness as any others. Montaigne would perhaps simply nod. He would recognize this night. He spent many of them himself, turning over the same questions, finding that the anticipated misfortunes rarely arrived in the form he had imagined, and that this never quite stopped him from imagining them. He would not offer a solution, because he had none to offer. He would offer companionship, which is its own form of ease. The existential thinkers would say that the open future pressing against the present is real. The uncertainty is not an illusion, and being honestly in contact with that uncertainty, rather than hiding from it in false confidence or numbing distraction, is a form of courage that operates quietly in the dark, without audience. And Laozi, or whoever it was who wrote what has come down to us as the Tao Te Ching, would offer no argument at all, only an image, a river finding its level, water yielding to the shape of what contains it, the universe, when the mind is still, yielding in return. The stillness is not achieved. It arrives, and when it arrives in the space that was already there, in the quiet between thoughts, in the pause between one imagined scenario and the next, in the small moments when the river rests in its own depth before continuing. The room is as it was at the beginning of this reflection. The darkness has not changed. The quiet is the same quiet. The weight of whatever covers you is the same weight. The distant sounds, if any remain, are as they were, and the mind has moved through a great deal of territory. Husserl's forward-reaching consciousness, James's flowing stream, Schopenhauer's restless will, Adler's future-oriented being, Bergson's blurring of time, Spinoza's emotionally charged ideas, Montaigne's honest observation of the gap between imagined and actual suffering, the existential encounter with genuine uncertainty, and the Taoist invitation to allow the river to flow. None of these ideas has resolved the forward-reaching mind. They were never meant to. They were offered as company for a night that was already long, as perspectives that might, if they found the right moment, shift something slightly in the relationship between the thinker and the thoughts. The things you are anticipating are real in the sense that Spinoza described. They generate genuine emotion because the mind holds them with genuine conviction. They will arrive in their own form, which will differ from the imagined form in ways both expected and unexpected. The conversations will have their own textures. The outcomes will carry their own accidental details. The situations will be more specific and more contingent, and in many ways more manageable than the imagination has suggested. Or they will be harder. That too is possible. Montaigne did not pretend otherwise, and neither should we. Some anticipated difficulties arrive with the difficulty intact. Some feared outcomes materialize. The imagination, for all its tendency toward exaggeration, is not always wrong. But the mind that has rested, that has allowed the river to find its own level in the dark hours, meets whatever comes with a different quality of attention than the mind that spent the night fighting its own forward motion. That is not a promise. It is simply an observation about the relationship between rest and capacity. The room has been quiet throughout all of this. Whatever sounds the night holds have continued in their own steady way, unaffected by the philosophical journey this reflection has taken. The darkness has not deepened or lightened. The weight of whatever covers you has remained what it was. The breath that has been moving through you since long before any of these ideas were encountered has been moving still, in and out, with the patient regularity that the body maintains without being asked. The body, in fact, has been doing something quite different from what the mind has been doing. While the mind has been reaching forward, the body has been simply here, simply present in this moment, in this posture, in this room. The body does not anticipate in the same way the mind does. It exists in the present, largely, by its nature. The breath does not prepare itself for tomorrow's breath. It arrives and departs in its own time, without rehearsal. There is something worth noticing in that contrast, not as a directive to be more like the body and less like the mind, but simply as an observation about the texture of this moment. Two things are happening simultaneously. The mind is moving forward through anticipated futures. The body is resting here, now, in this room, in this darkness, and both are true at once. Both are happening in the same being. The motion and the stillness coexist, neither cancelling the other. Bergson would say that this coexistence is exactly what duration is. Duration holds everything together. the memory and the anticipation, the motion and the stillness, the forward reach and the present rest, in a continuous flow that does not require these things to be resolved into a single state. They are all here, in the flow, all part of what this moment actually is. Husserl would say that the present moment is always already this rich, always already containing its retentions of the past and its pretensions of the future. The thinness we sometimes attribute to the present, the sense that the present is just this one narrow instant between what was and what will be, is an abstraction. The lived present is wide. It holds much more than a single instant. It holds the thickness of a life in progress, and James would say that the stream is still flowing. It will flow as long as consciousness flows. The quality of the stream changes. The things it moves toward change. Sometimes it moves through open and pleasant country, and sometimes it moves through more difficult terrain. But the stream itself, the continuous forward motion of a conscious life, is simply what it is. Not a problem to be solved, a fact to be accompanied. There is something worth noticing about the mind that has reached this point in the reflection. It has moved through a great deal of territory in the company of thinkers who took the human condition seriously, who did not flinch from its difficulties, who brought their full intelligence to bear on the experience of being alive in time, with an uncertain future pressing against the present, and a body that carries the weight of what the mind imagines. These thinkers were not offering easy comfort. None of them said, "Everything will be fine." None of them said, "The worrying is unnecessary." They said, in their various ways, "This is what it is to be human. This is what it is to care about things. This is what it is to be a conscious being facing a future that has not yet been decided." And there is, in that collective witnessing, something that functions like companionship. The particular solitude of the sleepless night, the sense of being alone with thoughts that do not resolve, is not entirely accurate. There have been many thousands of nights, across many centuries, in which thoughtful people lay awake with the same forward-reaching mind and turned toward the same questions. They found different ways to describe it. They found different frameworks for understanding it. But they recognized it. They were here too. The night is long. The quiet is steady. Somewhere, the distance between now and morning is getting slightly smaller, though it does not feel that way from inside duration. The things that feel pressing will still be present tomorrow, and tomorrow the world will provide what the night cannot: actual information, actual conversation, actual events in their specific, textured, unimagined form. Until then, the river flows, and you are here, in it, which is exactly where you are supposed to be. Let the breath come as it comes. Let the thoughts move where they move. Let the darkness be what it is. Let the small sounds of the night be as they are. Let the weight of what covers you be felt quietly, without requiring anything of it. The river is flowing. The night is long. There is no hurry in any direction. Sleep is welcome, but it is not required. Understanding is enough.